podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this, our 98th episode, yeah, it's been a long time, babe. We've been doing this for quite a while. Seasoned podcasters.
So tired.
And in this 98th episode, we'll be reviewing the first series of Amazon Prime's superhero satire, The Boys. Then we'll be asking, is it realistic to portray superheroes realistically? So stay tuned to find out the answer to that conundrum. But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, after watching quite a lot of reasonably bombastic or high-concept dramas lately, I wanted something a bit more, talky and character-driven. So I decided to watch *Halt and Catch Fire*, a period drama set in the 80s about the creation of a computer. Yeah, it's set at a fictional electronics company called Cardiff Electric, who are attempting to create a PC for the burgeoning PC market to compete with the giant of the time, IBM. It's sort of spearheaded by a mysterious man with a shady past who's amazing at sales, played by Lee Pace, who has left IBM under dubious circumstances and has a bunch of their trade secrets he'd now like to employ to make a competing PC with this tiny company. And it's about, this sort of scrappy underdog trying to create this PC from scratch, despite not really knowing fully how to do it. And there's a lot of angst and a lot of people working hard and neglecting their families. And it does pretty much what it says on the tin. It does sometimes seem a bit like someone said, okay, we need the next Mad Men, bring me the next Mad Men. And so they've got this 80s drama with a bit of sort of period stereotyping, some boxy retro aesthetic, and a mysterious man with a dark past who's amazing at sales. He's kind of the weak point of the show, to be honest. The other characters, the sort of lead engineer played by Scoot McNair and the programmer played by Mackenzie Davis, are both quite interesting characters because they're having the engineer is having a bit of an inferiority complex breakdown, and the programmer is a sort of young punk thrashing against the stereotypes quite hard, and it's quite interesting, but in quite a sort of self-conscious, try-hard teenage way. Whereas the lead character is a bit of a poor man's Don Draper. But yeah, him aside, it's quite fun. It's quite interesting. It's quite nicely paced and nicely characterised. I hear it gets a lot better in subsequent seasons and maybe breaks a bit away from its Mad Men influences. But for now, the first season's pretty fun.
Sounds like a lot of shows when they start trying desperately to, fit into a pre-made mould of something that's been popular, and then they need some time to find themselves, establish themselves as an individual show.
Yeah, I think so. It sounds like it goes a bit less office-based and a bit more into this sort of broader portrayal of 80s culture and stuff in later seasons, which will be interesting. It goes for 4 years before it came to some sort of actual written ending, so I'm hoping to get through a decent chunk of that.
Sounds good. One of the things that made Mad Men, I think, really work is the way that they sort of weaved in historical events into the plot, which is what you want from a lot of period dramas, the broad sweep of history as the backdrop. So does this show bring in, because Mad Men was depicting 60s history, so do they do the same for the 80s?
No, I don't think they've really referenced that many strict historical events. I mean, there's a lot of talk about what's happening in the PC market at the time. Like the idea of them trying to create the first portable PC or whatever. But I don't know if there's a lot of actual reference to the wider history. To be honest, I'm not familiar enough with 80s history or 80s American history or whatever to work out exactly what historical events they could bring in.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. Things like Reagan's, election or things like that. And it depends when in the 80s it's set, I suppose, if it's like early or late 80s. Maybe there's a view that the 80s isn't as historically interesting as the 60s. There wasn't as much going on. Or people think that, probably a lot of our audience remembers the 80s, so there's no point to kind of dramatise history. Whereas the 60s is receding into history.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised to find that they're going for a certain degree of parallel with, the way we're increasingly getting a little tired of modern day, air quotes, tech bros, and the way they push forward and self-destruct and create this culture where you're expected to push forward and self-destruct in order to create new tech, but no one's really entirely thought through.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, people basically immolating themselves to try and get the money and the time and the resources to make this technology work.
Yeah, that's interesting though, yeah. So you recommend it?
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty good so far, and I have faith it'll get better. I was reading The Guardian's top 100 TV shows of the 21st century the other day, and for the record, I counted, and I've seen about 50 of them, and this did slip in there. This was somewhere in the very, very low end of the chart, I think. So, it's made its mark on the 21st century so far, however small.
Excellent.
That's me. What have you been absorbing.
Well, I went to the cinema to see a new film called Hustlers, which I can recommend to our listeners. It's an interesting story based on a real-life event. I believe the film itself is based on a New Yorker article about a group of strippers who basically fleece a lot of money out of some Wall Street guys. So yeah, it's a sort of crime film, but also a biopic of the characters involved. It's sort of set in the strip club just before the 2008 financial crash. So it's this strip club that has the clientele being mainly Wall Street people, and then after the crash happens, there's kind of no more money, so I don't want to send too much because part of the joy of the film is how the scheme unfolds. So basically, they have to come up with this scheme to con money out of people. But yeah, because they can't make a living anymore from the clubs. So yeah, I don't want to say too much about the plot because how it sort of unfolds and kind of the steps they go, and it's kind of a logical progression from kind of increasingly more like unethical bits to they're just kind of outright robbing people. But yeah, it's worth seeing. So the main character is played by Constance Wu, who's very good, but the main supporting role is played by Jennifer Lopez, who is absolutely excellent in this film. It's like a really, really good performance. Yeah, shows a real emotional range. And yeah, just playing this kind of the sort of ringleader of the gang, this kind of like larger than life personality. There's been sort of some buzz that she might get an Oscar nomination or even potentially an Oscar win for this film. And yeah, I think certainly a nomination would be deserved. She's really, really good in this film. I think Jennifer Lopez did acting before she was a singer, but she certainly like matured into like a really confident actress and really good performer in this film. Yeah, she's the main reason to go see this film because it is a great performance and it's a really entertaining evocation of 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, I've seen a few good reviews of this. A lot of people talk about like a very sort of good, sort of classic, people will get drawn into crime and self-destruct type film, and it sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah,
that's very much it. There's a real sense of kind of escalating stakes and tension as the kind of, the crime gets more and more sophisticated, but also more and more, it's like over time it becomes more and more like, well, I can see why they're doing that, and like, ooh, that's going a bit further, that's going a bit further. Like, I think also like the film's quite interesting in its moral ambiguity, because I was thinking that like, to what degree are you supposed to sympathise with these people? Like, are you supposed to think they're just entirely justified stealing from people? I mean, they are stealing from Wall Street guys, famously unsympathetic people. But yeah, I think the film's trying to do something, I think, quite clever with some moral ambiguity and the degree to which, like, you're supposed to, like, well, I like these characters, I'm invested in them. Like, the main character, she's trying to get this money because to pay off her grandmother's debts and to look after her grandmother. The Jennifer Lopez character has a daughter. So yeah, you sort of empathise for them, but at the same time, you're kind of thinking, I empathise with you, but have you crossed a line? At what point did you cross a line? So yeah, which I think that's kind of an essential part of the kind of spiral into crime story that we're sort of familiar with.
Well, yeah, but I haven't seen this film, but I've seen Breaking Bad, and yeah, there's definitely a step and a step and a step until you realise you're in too deep. That's always a big moment in these films, isn't it? The in too deep moments. Yeah,
it does that. It does that well. Yeah, and it does well. Like I say, it's a plot we've seen a lot of times. Like, yeah, Breaking Bad is probably one of the best and most famous versions of this. But I think it's unusual when you see that plot done and all the characters are women. Yeah, it's usually about like a man who's consumed by greed. Like Breaking Bad is the kind of, or greed or desire or, ambition is something, it's the classic like Breaking Bad, Scarface, some absolute classics. But yeah, it's unusual, I think, when it's a group of women sort of, going through that particular plot arc as well. So yes, that makes it slightly different.
Yeah, no, I've seen some good reviews of this as well. I might actually have to watch it at some point.
I'd recommend seeing it. I think some of the way it's been sold is like somewhat misleading. Like I've seen sort of lots of trailers that show sort of shots of like women not wearing very much, walking in slow motion into clubs where sort of like mid-aughts hip hop plays, and I think it's kind of someone somewhere in the marketing department has just tried to like, can we package and sell the sexiness? It's a film about sexy strippers with Jennifer Lopez in it, and it's actually, I think, a much more sophisticated film, I think, than the marketing would have you to believe. It is have something to say about moral ambiguity, and it's like some great performances and some good characters. So if you were put off by like, I don't know, the poster of the trailer, I can recommend it. It is good. It is worth seeing.
Okay, and now for today's main review type segment, we're here to talk about The Boys, the new original series from Amazon, based of course on the comic by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson, about a group of ex-military hardmen who are now tasked with keeping in check the superheroes, who are basically corporate mascots who fly around doing product endorsements, making public appearances, occasionally saving people, and generally watching over the entire planet. And, you know, the boys, the military unit in question, they don't like them, they don't trust them. One of them's girlfriend died when a superhero literally ran through them. The boys are going to keep the superheroes in check. This is our second Garth Ennis adaptation from the same producers, although a different actual showrunner, after Preacher. And yeah, much like Preacher, this was a comic where Garth Ennis very much indulged his need to have lots and lots of really stupid cartoony things happen, along with an accompanying general sense of grim, angry nihilism, because Garth Ennis is not a comic writer who likes superheroes. In fact, he kind of seems to flat out hate them due to their long-running dominance of the comic space. So, him writing a comic about military men, Garth Ennis really likes war comics, killing superheroes, was a bit of an on-the-nose meta commentary for Garth Ennis. It's a bit of a sort of angry personal project, so it was interesting to see how it translates to the screen. Alistair, how did it do?
Well, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good show. Obviously, there's a lot of superhero stuff around the TV, film, comics, things like that. And when I saw this, I thought, like, all right, is this going to be an original take on superheroes? And, you know, is it going to be something different, or is it going to be like, I don't know, a sort of knockoff Defenders or something like that? And I guess there's been even more takes in superheroes in comics and things like that, and this may not be a particularly original take in sort of superhero comics, but I did feel this TV show was actually, in terms of superhero films and TV, was actually quite different and quite original in sort of tone. The general tone of darkness and cynicism made this show stand out. There aren't many shows that are kind of so unrelentingly nihilistic about the possibilities of superheroes. There's very little sense of like people with abnormal powers could be like the kind of custodians of the world, or could stand up for the little guy, or things like that. It's very much, I think we've gone from great power comes great responsibility to power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So almost all the superheroes are deeply flawed characters. Some of them are just flat out sort of psychopathic, or at least, you know, sort of seem to have a sort of a hatred of regular people. This, for me, struck me as quite, an original take on superhero TV. Like I say, Nick, it might not be so original in comics, but I don't know to what degree, like, The Boys may have set the tone for things that came after it. But I did like it, and I liked the dark cynicalness, it was all sort of quite anti-corporate America, a comment on the fact that, corporate America ruins everything. They've ruined superheroes by turning them into cash cows rather than from being good guys. But also, it had this real, as well as being cynical, quite dark, and some really quite nasty bits. It had there was a kind of comedic tone running throughout, but it wasn't the sort of Marvel-esque bantery comedic tone. There was a sort of an underrunning current of the absurd, but the absurdity of it never seemed to distract from the seriousness of it or the dark tones. They managed to balance the two quite well, so I enjoyed all of that.
Yeah, no, I thought this was really good. I thought this is probably actually works a bit better than the source, because although it still kept its sort of base cynicism, the comic, as I sort of implied earlier, does always feel like it's being written by a man sitting in a dark room, clutching a glass of whiskey with one hand and punching his keyboard whilst grunting to himself, I just hate superheroes so fucking much. And although this is cynical about superheroes, it's not dripping with contempt in quite the same way. It doesn't feel quite as much like when the boys kill a superhero, which they don't actually do that many times in this, although, a few of them do obviously get it. It's not entirely, a bit of catharsis for the writer. It doesn't entirely feel like the superhero is a bastard who deserves it, and the boys are killing him, and fair enough, he's dead now. Good. I hope they really chop him up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think similar to what I was saying about Hustlers is that there's a really good sense of moral ambiguity here, in that, you're not supposed to be, or at least I felt, you're not supposed to be completely on side with the boys. There's very much a sense of like, well, the superheroes are probably abusing their powers, and some more than others, but hunting down and killing them, is that a good solution? It just sounds like just piling evil on top of evil, or darkness on top of darkness. And there's also a sense of maybe some of the characters in The Boys, especially the their sort of leader, played by Carl Urban, has some kind of got some bad motivations. They're just out for pure revenge and to kill as many superheroes as possible, or soups, as they call them in the show, which is quite a nice shorthand. But yeah, you're supposed to get a sense like, I see where the boys are coming from. I can see why, especially the sort of main character Huey, whose girlfriend was accidentally killed by a superhero. You can see where they're coming from, and you kind of empathise with them. But at the same time, there's this sense of like, are they going too far? And again, it also has the in over your head bit, as we discussed for Hustlers. So the show did a good way of playing with your sympathies and make you think like, am I on side? Am I not on side? Which I liked.
Well, yeah, a lot of the superheroes, again compared to the comic, right? A lot of the superheroes, apart from a couple, like the main Superman analogue and this character Starlight, who's kind of the main sort of sympathetic superhero who has a sort of romance subplot with one of the main characters. Apart from those two or three, most of the superheroes of the comic are basically caricatures who just sit there snorting coke until the boys kill them.
Yeah.
And in this, there's a little bit more sort of effort to make them seem like real people. Like, often arseholes, or often quite kind of tragic losers, or slightly grubby people, but they are still human beings to some degree. They are allowed to have pathos and emotion, and when they die or when they do incredibly stupid things and self-destruct, it's kind of sad in a way. Yeah, there's an interesting spectrum from the superhero characters they choose to write as complete and utter dopes. Like the Aquaman analogue, the Deep, really gets it shoveled onto him over the course of the boys. It's quite...
Yeah.
It's not a good season for the Deep. And it's interesting watching how they write him compared to how they write the A-Train Flash analogue character compared to how they write the Homelander, the main Superman one. And there is a bit more of a spectrum between all those, which I think makes it more interesting. It also means that, it feels like quite a good, dense show. It's definitely got the sort of premium telly pacing going on, but it's got enough characters and enough going on, and each episode usually has enough event for me to feel fairly satisfied by them. They're quite good, meaty episodes. Like I say, I really enjoyed watching this, to be honest. I don't actually have that many criticisms.
Yeah, no, same here. The plot is really good and engaging. Again, the character of the Deep was something quite interesting. One of the things, before I actually say this, is that it struck me as it's quite, not only is this a sort of a superhero parody, it's quite obviously a Justice League parody. They clearly are. Homelander is Superman, Queen Maeve is Wonder Woman, the Deep is Aquaman, A-Train is Flash. There's one who doesn't speak called Black Noir, who I guess is supposed to be Batman. It does strike me as quite obviously the Justice League.
Yeah. In the comics, there was also another one called Jack from Jupiter, who was obviously the Martian Manhunter, but I guess because the Martian Manhunter hasn't gone on to be that big a thing in culture, they're just not doing him, at least not yet.
Yeah, but the character of the Deep I thought was quite interesting. But before we go any further with this, I suppose it's probably a good point to do a warning just about this show and maybe this review, is that the show does, I think, quite an interesting way, and it's worth talking about, explore issues of sexual misconduct and sexual misconduct in the workplace, and also to a degree of bordering into sexual violence. So if for whatever reason you're not basically down for discussion of this I guess is a content warning at this point, that I'm certainly about to talk in not horrific detail, but about issues to do with sexual misconduct and sexual violence. So if you're not down with that, you might want to skip ahead. There is timestamps in the show notes. I just wanted to say a brief content warning, because in the first episode, when Starlight joins the Seven, their sort of Justice League analogue, the Deep pressures her into a non-consensual sort of sexual encounter, which really sets up his character as quite unpleasant. There's a bit later in the show when the woman who's sort of in charge of kind of managing the Seven at least heavily implies that Starlight's not the first person to complain about his sexual misconduct in the workplace, but then he kind of really gets fooled off his pedestal, and he gets transferred to kind of the back end of nowhere, and kind of gets shoveled off into obscurity. And again, the show I think is quite interesting in how it's you feel kind of sorry for the Deep, but also at the same time you feel but he's also a predatory bastard. He just takes advantage of naive women, and then you start to think I shouldn't really feel sorry for him. But I think the show's quite clever in playing with your sympathies.
Well, I think realistically it is part of a sort of similar demeanour, in that the Deep is clearly a very sort of sad man riddled with this sort of chronic inferiority complex about being, the silly Aquaman one. And, he deals with this, at least partially, by coercing women into sexual favours to make himself feel like a big shot. It is part of him being the loser that he is, and it's all different sides of the same sad coin.
It's part of his personality. But I thought it was handled well. And again, the show feels like it's got something more to say than just about superheroes. It's got something to say about Me Too and sort of sex in the workplace and how powerful men, like in big companies, because most of the plot takes inside Vought, this big, huge company that owns the kind of superheroes and markets them and packages them, and now is trying to get defense contracts for them. This is trying to say something about how corporate America or corporations deal with allegations of kind of sexual misconduct against employees and how high-powered men in these companies exploit their positions of power. I mean, it's got something I think quite nuanced to say about this, and it's kind of makes it more accessible because it's told through the medium of superheroes who have actual, superhuman power as well, I suppose, as just corporate and social power. So I felt the show was exploring some interesting ground there in a quite nuanced way, which I think goes to show like kind of the quality of the writing. They was like bringing out these difficult themes and kind of exploring them,
and then doing a string of ridiculous jokes about him trying to rescue dolphins and accidentally killing them and that sort of thing,
which is kind of weird because I kind of quite hated the Deep, but then you kind of everything he does just goes terribly wrong in like a comedic way. Like the whole bit of him rescuing a dolphin was hilarious. There's a bit when he tries to save a lobster, and it also is quite funny and goes completely wrong. So I kind of, I thought the show was playing around with your sympathies of like first making you hate him, then make you see that he's a ridiculous loser.
Not to be Captain references the comic again, but in the comic, the bit with Starlight joining the Seven, it's literally just she walks into the meeting room and then about 3 different members of the Seven, I think it might be A-Train and Homelander, and possibly Black Noir as well, all get their dicks out and walk towards her. And it's not really part of any kind of arc about them being like inferiority complex losers. It's just a sort of joke scene about what a horrible place this is, and that's kind of it, really. Yeah, it does come across as another moment of superheroes. They're probably all twats. And I feel the show has kind of made something better out of that quite cheap joke.
Yeah, like I say, it felt like it had something to say about kind of this moment in politics as well as superhero culture. But I guess also the other things, like with the character of Homelander, I think they did a really good job with his arc of like kind of revealing that he really is quite a scary and just sort of disturbed individual, and kind of peeling back his character, I thought was where with the Deep is just kind of he's quite unpleasant at first, and then over time you realise that he's just a sort of ridiculous loser. But with Homelander, you get the sense at the beginning that there's more to him than just this kind of carefully created exterior of being the kind of Superman, the kind of perfect all-American man. But they quite quickly reveal that underneath it there is quite a dark, twisted personality, which I thought was that character arc was handled quite well.
Yeah, I thought the pacing of that was handled quite well, in that there was quite a nice turn in the first episode from them maybe hinting that he was actually not going to be an arsehole to it quickly becoming clear that he's actually the worst arsehole. Or at least the most, the sort of the scariest and most intensely psychopathic arsehole, because, a lot of the Seven are dicks, but they're dicks in a slightly sort of pathetic way. They're just not very nice people in the sort of standard grubby way that a lot of not nice people are not nice people, whereas the Homelander is this sort of terrifying figure.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you do feel like scared every time it's on screen. But the others are more sort of, I don't know, cynical, I suppose. Like, especially like Queen Maeve is someone who's like, you get someone's compromised their morals in order to succeed in their career, and has at some point just completely lost any sense of morality and now just does whatever, and also kind of looks down on people who are idealistic and things like that. So the others are kind of more just sort of cynical. And A-Train again they kind of go through a plot line with A-Train of him that he's basically kind of sort of a thing that he's taking performance enhancing drugs because he doesn't want to lose his edge as the fastest man in the world, and kind of again he's sort of again someone who's allowed themselves to be consumed by their job and the power of being a superhero to the point where they kind of just lost themselves.
Yeah. I mean, having been slightly critical of the comic during this segment, I think the main thing that they've successfully taken from the comic, which I think has translated more or less one-to-one and does actually work, is the sort of the world building. I think there's a lot of, considering a lot of the reason for this comic existing does just seem to be for military men to kick the shit out of superheroes. The amount of world building and thought that Garth Ennis clearly put into this sort of corporate setup, the way Vought sort of the Vought Corporation embeds itself into America, the way it creates the superheroes, the way the system works. There's a whole history of it in the comic, which we haven't even got into yet, and I don't know whether we'll be going into that in subsequent seasons. But even just the stuff they've done so far, like how it's involved in the culture, the way it feeds back into these sort of religious festivals, it's quite well thought through, again, especially considering how silly a lot of the actual plot is. And yeah, they've very much taken all of that and used it in the TV show quite well. There's a lot of nuance in there for them to dig into.
Yeah, they've done a good job of kind of embedding the superheroes into what's recognisably American culture, how kind of superheroes have become kind of the real superheroes of their world are the sort of fictional superheroes of their world as well, and that they all seem to have TV deals and TV shows like reality TV and fiction films, but also kind of like Kardashian style, reality TV stuff going on. So they seem to be both kind of Homelander also is both the Kanye West and the Superman of that universe. He's kind of his real and fictional self. And also the fact they kind of, again, it's especially like Homelander and Starlight, who are supposed to be these kind of their public image is these very pure, very upstanding, righteous American superheroes, and how that's kind of linked in with a kind of evangelical Christian culture in America. And there's like a episode that takes place at a kind of evangelical Christian sort of festival gathering type thing. Yeah, when Homelander baptizes people, which is kind of terrifying. There's a terrifying sequence there. Yeah, they kind of, like you say, they made it feel like it's recognisably America, that superheroes are somewhat deeply embedded with the religious evangelical nature of America, all that scene, and also corporate America, and also politics. And superheroes are kind of mixed up in a recognisable version of America.
Yeah, I think perhaps cleverly they've moved a bit beyond putting the boot into actual superhero culture and more into putting the boot into celebrity culture in a sort of slightly broader way, which, seems to have worked insofar as getting the show out there. But I've seen a lot of people I know, including people outside the we consume a huge amount of superhero media section, watching and enjoying this show. So
yeah, exactly.
I guess it's done all right for them. I feel like they could, if anything, they could probably go further into really putting the boot into, the way superheroes are in the modern world. Their current sort of omnipresence.
Yeah.
I feel like there's some angle which the boys could take a few more explicit shots at that, but maybe they didn't want to, or they haven't got to it yet, because that wasn't really the case to anywhere near the same degree when the comic was made. So a lot of the world building they've done so far, or the events they've depicted, have been roughly as on the comic. But I'd be interested to see if they go a bit beyond it with the same success in future seasons.
Yeah, maybe that's something for them to develop in future seasons. But they seem to be more like, spoofing celebrity culture and corporate culture, the way that kind of corporate greed in America has consumed anything that's good about superheroes. They've just become a product that's been packaged and sold, and saving people is very much secondary to selling goods. And there's all sorts of bits when they keep talking about polling, how the superheroes are polling who they're popular with. Like there's a bit when Starlight saves like a teenage girl from being attacked by two teenage boys, and then he's like, then later they're talking, and she just does it just because it's the right thing to do. But then there's a whole bit later when you talk about how this has improved her polling amongst certain demographics, especially like women in liberal areas and things like that. So she can't, everything she does, even if it's just generally helping someone just for the sake of helping them, becomes kind of corporatized and turned into a product, which I guess is a sort of satire on how corporate America ruins everything that's good. Including superheroes.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the message of both versions of The Boys, to be honest. But I think the TV show is doing a better job of communicating it. I liked the Huey and Annie relationship. It was, to be honest, kind of simplistic in the comic, but I thought they did a nice job of making that the sort of vaguely sincere moral centre of the whole mess.
Yeah.
Even as a lot of the time bigger, more stupid, or more cartoonish, or just grubby and evil things happened around it. I think they've done a nice job of making sure they're relatively sincere about the Huey and Annie relationship, and that'll just about carry it through. Yeah,
I thought they did a good performance, actually. The guy playing Huey, especially for a lot of the show, he suffers from PTSD from seeing his girlfriend ripped apart by being collided with something travelling at supersonic speed. They do quite a good job of showing how messed up he is about this and his PTSD, and I thought the actor's performance was really well. And ditto for the woman playing Starlight, who I think, did a really good job of portraying someone who's kind of maybe a bit naive, but also hopeful, and generally wants to do good, and also wants to retain a sense of being hopeful and doing good amongst this kind of, the world where so much has been corrupted by money and power.
Yeah, I think it's such a cynical show, it'd be quite easy to write the two not very cynical characters as, cartoonishly stupid or naive, but I think they actually did a nice job of staying on the right side of that.
Yeah, and Simon Pegg had a nice cameo.
Yeah, that is, again, an in-joke for the comic fans. The comic version of Huey was drawn to look very, very strongly like Simon Pegg for some reason. The artist just took him as the model for the character. It was obviously sort of younger, I think sort of spaced era Simon Pegg.
Yeah.
Whereas modern-day Simon Pegg is probably a bit too old to play Huey without some serious rewriting, so instead he's Huey's dad.
Yeah, well, Space came out 20 years ago, so that's terrifying in and of itself. Yeah, and Simon Pegg does look incredibly young when you rewatch it, as I rewatched some Space recently. But yeah, I guess, I realise I must be getting old now that Simon Pegg's old enough to play a character with a sort of, son in his early 20s.
To be honest, I thought like that might have been a bit of a push, but clearly they wanted him for, the Easter egg value, so fair enough.
Yeah, I guess, you give someone a cardigan and they kind of look a bit older.
Give someone a cardigan, make their hair look grey and a bit thin, and you're fine.
Yeah, he's probably aged up a bit. And also then, there was the one scene he has with Carl Urban. I kind of liked their little Star Trek reunion.
It has to be said, I've mostly been pretty glowing about this show, but Carl Urban's Cockney accent is not the finest thing I've ever seen.
No. My only criticism of the show is it did feel, other than the Carl Urban character and the Huey character, the other members of the boys were perhaps a little thin on characterization. I like the one who had like a family and was kind of constantly on the phone to his wife and trying to like play down. Yeah, he's constantly on the phone to his wife and trying to like kind of hide the fact that he's in a secret superhero killing squad. But yeah, he maybe a little bit more personality, but I felt like they could have gone more into they could have developed the supporting members of the boys a bit more. Like there's Frenchie, he's an interesting character, but like at first he's just kind of like a drug taking psycho, and then he just kind of becomes just sort of there by the end. So, but maybe they're saving that for future series. They'll go more into their backstories.
Yeah, I mean, Frenchie's got a lot more nuance here compared to the comic, but I'm sure there's more to go on that. To be honest, for a series called The Boys, there was a lot more focus on the superheroes than the boys a lot of the time. Like, yeah, they gave a decent amount of characterization to, like, 3 or 4 of the superheroes and only, like, 2 of the boys, which is perhaps a bit strange. I guess the superheroes are more sort of interesting and bombastic, but yeah. There is definitely a lot more mythology for Mother's Milk for them to go into in future seasons. I like what they've done with the other 2, actually. In the comic, they're very two-dimensional, and here they're almost up to 3. Yeah, I think they could definitely go more into the boys other than the lead 2, more than Butcher and Huey, but I guess they've got to leave themselves something for season 2. I think they've established them as a nice sort of functioning unit.
Yeah.
Well, functional-ish.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to say something back. And what I also really liked with the show, I thought it really benefited from being 8 episodes. Like, it was 8 quite nice, tight episodes. Each one ended on like a good cliffhanger that sort of drove you forward to the next episode. Yeah, I thought, 8 is a good sort of length for this sort of thing. I was thinking if it had been 13 episodes, unless they could summon up a lot more interesting plot, then I felt they probably would have dragged a bit. Like, for example, what I think was a good sign of this series, and it was a good length, is they didn't do a flashback episode. So the whole time I was sitting there thinking, like, if they do a whole episode that takes place, kind of 8 years ago when Butcher's girlfriend is still alive, and they do a whole episode kind of digging into that, and probably about how Huey meets Robin, and basically, like, that's the point when it'll be like, no, you've not got enough plot for a whole series because you've got to do one episode filling in the stuff that we already know happens because we've seen its consequences later on. But no, there was a few brief flashbacks, but only like a couple of scenes. They didn't do a whole episode on that, and I generally felt that was a sign that, you've got the right amount of plot and the right amount of episodes.
Yeah, no, I liked the way it always felt like it kept moving. I kept expecting it to settle into a more sort of TV-ish sort of status quo, I suppose, of the boys, setting up a base and going about the business of hunting down the soups. But it always kept sort of moving, which was on one level kind of surprising. But as a viewer, I quite enjoyed it.
Yep, so overall, good show.
Yeah, good show, yeah. As Garth Ennis adaptations go, this is definitely better than Preacher. Well done, everyone. I look forward to season 2. Okay, and following on from The Boys, our question of the fortnight. Is it realistic to portray superheroes realistically? It is, of course, very much an ongoing trend to try and ask, what if superheroes were real, and then make some sort of gritty dive into how it would affect people or society or both. But is this actually plausible? Would superheroes actually be a constant drudge of misery and unhappiness if they really happened? Would they ever really happen in anything resembling that way? Is The Boys the most realistic attempt so far? Who knows? Alistair, what do you think?
It's an interesting question. I mean, on one level, you can just say that superheroes are sort of fantastical creations, so any view of superheroes is realistic as any other. I mean, Marvel obviously have a very optimistic take on the superhero, and I suppose there's nothing to say that isn't how things... Yeah, I don't know, like, especially the MCU, that isn't the way that things would be. I mean, their plot lines stray more into superheroes dealing with fantasy-related things like, alien invasions, as opposed to, like, when The Boys is dealing with, like, more, like, real-world stuff like superheroes engaging in crime. But I think there's an element of you can claim that superheroes is realistic to portray them any way that you want. Yeah, and obviously when you watch something like The Boys that's trying to play on the idea of realism, it makes you think, oh, like the Marvel films are so ridiculous that they must clearly appear fantastical. But when you watch them, you do sense like, yeah, they're trying to see like, they're trying to play on something that's believably, or at least to varying degrees, is believable, like Iron Man being an arms dealer, I suppose. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that, I don't know, yeah, it relates to our world in terms of, yeah, but then obviously you get films like Dark Knight is trying to say like, yeah, well, there's no magic or whatever, or superpowers in that world. It's just like, is it realistic, that someone kind of basically employs a lot of theatre tricks to terrify villains? Is that a realistic way of portraying superheroes? I think ultimately, like, there's no way you can say that this is, it's unrealistic to try and show what would be real against something that's kind of a fictional concept. But, which leaves the door open to say, like, well, anything could be real, so what aspect of the world do you want to play up? So such as like, The Boys is playing up the corporate aspect. The Dark Knight is playing up maybe the sort of the vigilante aspect, that superheroes would stay under the radar, they wouldn't be so public.
Well, yeah, but I think to an extent the popularity of superheroes probably on some level makes them more realistic. If tomorrow people around the world started waking up with superpowers, at least a couple of them would probably put on stupid costumes and try and become superheroes, just because they've seen a lot of those movies at this point, which might not have been the case 30, 40, 80 years ago.
Yeah.
To an extent, at some stage they've just sort of made themselves realistic. Or yes, is it also plausible that they would then proceed to immediately get killed in the first crime they tried to stop?
Yeah, I mean, every so often you see, it does end up in the papers, like someone's trying to actually form a real superhero group. There was a group in Croydon a while ago who were a group of crime patrolling masked vigilantes. I think didn't like one of them basically get beaten up by a gang at one point when they were trying to, I think, like just stop some teenagers smoking weed or something like that. But like it happens every so often, and I'm not really sure to what degree the people who are doing it are taking it seriously. But every so often, some people tries to do it in real life. So are the most realistic superheroes the people we laugh at in the local papers?
Possibly. I mean, I was surprised someone hasn't made a film about them, to be honest. I guess we've had Kick-Ass. But even Kick-Ass, departed a little from its own rigid, depressing realism by the end.
Yeah, especially with the second film. That is actually on my list of like, maybe is that a realistic take on superheroes? Basically like a kid who can take a beating a bit better than someone else decides he wants to be a superhero, so puts on a homemade costume and again like goes and tries to again fight crime. So yeah, there's another film called Super in which a guy just picks up a wrench and starts hitting drug dealers with them. And it's the guy who plays Dwight in The Office, I think. But yeah, and inspired by Nathan Fillion playing a sort of a Christian superhero on TV in their world. Yeah, so again, is that like, a realistic portrayal of superheroes is actually just, is a man who's, I think the point of Super is that he's just really struggling with mental health problems. So yeah, again, which like Batman, so I guess it's a realistic, is superheroes just like a crazy man wearing a ski mask hitting people with a wrench outside Tesco's?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's trying to make some point about, in real life, would this all be a bit sad or a bit depressing or a bit just some people having a scuffle outside a supermarket? I guess, the problem is you eventually get into, well, if you ignore Batman, although I know it is hard to ignore Batman, the main thing that's missing from realistic superheroes a lot of the time is actual superpowers, which is, meant to be why they're super. Again, I know Batman, but most of the rest of them have some degree of superpowers. Even Kick-Ass, as you said, has his...
He's got a neurological problem, yeah.
His neurological problem or whatever, his unnatural ability to take a beating. Realistically, a lot of the interesting realistic portrayals of superheroes, which don't just break down to, is it just a man beating people up, are the ones, to me, that actually, take the superpowers themselves into account in some way.
Yeah.
And ideally have a slightly more interesting angle on it than just, we'd worship them as gods.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a direct shot at Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, but it's a reasonably direct one.
Yeah.
Because that's not what would actually happen.
I think we're too cynical as a society to accept Superman as our god and of virtue or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them try and start from the perspective that there's this figure who is seen as, I don't know, the great paternal figure. I guess like this Nathan Fillion figure you mentioned from Super, or like the Homelander is sort of seen externally on, what's it called?
The Boys.
The Boys, that show we just talked about for like 45 minutes. That's the one.
Yeah.
I'm awake. And
It's a bit early.
yeah, I think what's interesting to me is I don't know, part of me would always like to see a character written like that and actually done realistically, but whenever a character like that comes in, they always either make it weird religious further or just ignore the natural cynicism of society and just try and write it as if it's real. I mean, I'm British in 2019. If a character like that popped into existence now, would they just be, beloved by people who like good old-fashioned values and patriotism and hated by everyone else?
Yeah, well, they just become another facet of the culture war, I suppose, if they were like, would it be a liberal or conservative superhero? I mean, there's a British film called Super Bob, which I guess is kind of, again, it's a superhero film. And it does have that, what you're getting at is the idea that there's like a lot of superhero films require some kind of external MacGuffin sort of magical component to give people superpowers, because there's the realistic versions of Batman, basically someone with a wrench outside a supermarket beating up a drug dealer, or there's Super Bob, I guess, is the idea of a realistic Superman. Like, the plot is a meteorite strikes South London and hits a mailman on his round and he gets sort of superpowers, but he's just a bit ineffectual and things like that. But then, obviously it's a comedy film, but also that film, it's not too dissimilar to The Boys in that basically he gets caught up in a political struggle between, I think, Britain and America, and the UN gets involved because, again, and it's a quite common take on that. If there was one superhero in the world, they would become a pawn in the political machinations of the powerful, which is kind of the thing with The Boys, is that, like, now superheroes are mixed up with, like, defense contracts in Washington and trying to make money. So, again, that is, the other take that's floated as a realistic version of superheroes is, they just get caught up in geopolitics.
Yeah, I mean, there's a comic... A take on the Avengers written by the writer Mark Miller, who also wrote Kick-Ass. He does do a lot of but what if real superheroes stuff, and he does get very into the military industrial complex angle on superheroes. I think it was very early 2000s, to be honest. It was very much, if superheroes existed, they'd clearly be American military weapons who would get sent to knock down Middle Eastern countries. And there was lots of a little bit of sort of slightly satirical questioning of, it's Captain America getting dropped into Iraq to beat the shit out of it, but not a huge amount.
Was this all written around the time of the Second War in Iraq?
I think mid-2000s?
Yeah.
Early part of mid-2000s?
Yeah. Well, the war was in, like, 2003, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I guess, because they're using superheroes to explore elements of our geopolitics and to explore things about our world by saying that, like, our world is, especially at the time, was focused very much on conflicts in the Middle East. So if superheroes were real, they couldn't just, fly around Manhattan saving people from burning buildings. They would get sucked into the broader politics. They wouldn't, I think they're trying to say superheroes wouldn't be able to rise above it, which I guess is kind of what some things say. Like, I guess, like the Avengers, the kind of plot is we assume in the world of the Avengers there's still war in Syria and escalating tensions between China and America, but the Avengers don't concern themselves with such earthly matters. They're just there to defend Earth from alien invasions or invaders from other times or other dimensions. They don't get drawn into earthly politics, but I guess the counter version is to say, well, that's not realistic. Realistically, governments, geopolitics would get involved. Captain America is more likely to be sent to fight, Islamic State or Al-Shabaab than he is to spend most of his time fighting the Red Skull.
Well, I mean, you'll be asked, is it realistic to portray superheroes realistically? But the real question is it fun to portray superheroes realistically? A lot of these stories are kind of meant as escapism. Yes, a lot of them do attempt to comment a little on the issues of the time via allegory and so on. Which
can be fun, especially if depends on your audience is. If your audience is someone who wants something that digs in, has something to say, like The Boys has something to say about corporate America and things like that, then it's a different type of fun. The sort of fun that I like, the fun that isn't fun, fun to most people.
I think The Boys, to go back to praising The Boys, does do a good job, I think, of getting its realistic, aren't we cynical, isn't this what would happen, stuff in, without becoming a depressing slog.
Yeah.
Mostly through the use of cathartic violence and extremely absurd comedy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the moments of absurdism are very well timed to vary the diet a bit. Also, going back to link The Boys to the question of realistic superheroes, barring the fact that obviously, as far as we're aware, magic doesn't exist, so we can rule out, like, realistic Doctor Strange is just a non-starter, I guess, or even like realistic Superman. But in one other sense is that, so you could say realistic Batman is like a guy puts on a ski mask and decides to stop those people selling drugs underneath the local train tracks. But then what I think we're missing is, and what kind of superhero films and stories do, is that the world could conceivably have a real superhero in it, but what our world doesn't have are super villains, which is kind of what's necessary, I think, for the superhero story, and which The Boys does very well. I mean, we're kind of getting into spoilers territory, but I'm sure you're probably, if you're still with us, and you've probably seen The Boys at this point. Yeah, there's a plot of Vought, or some element of Vought, supplying terrorists with the superhero creating juice so that there can be supervillains to terrifying people into depending even more on Vought superheroes. And where the realism breaks down is very much around supervillains, because although you could tell us a believable story about a vigilante, and obviously there are vigilantes in this world, I mean, like, what's the line between a vigilante and just like a serial killer or things like that? Obviously that's being explored in comics, but like the supervillain is a thing that's lacking from our world, which is why when you start bringing supervillains in, it becomes less realistic and you get more into a kind of fantastical story.
Well, yeah, I guess it goes on this assumption that if we had superpowers, they would be very much controlled by some form of the man, and therefore they wouldn't just be out in the world creating supervillains. I mean, I guess kind of the closest we've had to that in, the Marvel movies, probably that subplot with the Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming, where he was, like, selling alien weapons to random street punks.
Yeah.
And which, is an interesting angle, and is also, how you get actual supervillains on a day-to-day life basis, rather than just every so often an evil being connected to the hero's mythology turns up.
Yeah, and also they're living off the kind of the mess left behind by superheroes, and they're digging through all the destroyed bits of evil robots and aliens, and basically to cobble together something which, we've praised, obviously, Spider-Man Homecoming a lot on this podcast, but that is quite a good idea and a clever idea that works well. And it's kind of in some ways reflected on our world in how, when very large states have like collapsed, then they've left behind lots of weapons and bits of military tech lying around that have been usually used to nefarious ends. So I guess they're trying to say something about that, or there's something related there.
A lot of people like that storyline, including us, because it has a good ring of truth. It's not something that's been done extensively in other superhero things, but it absolutely comes across as working.
Yeah.
It's the right level of sort of Marvel realism, but it seems like something people would do, even if the way it's being done is perhaps a little bit bombastic and comic booky. Well, bombastic and dramatic for added comic/film value.
Yeah.
Well, up to a point, I enjoy a certain sort of visual bombasticness. As I say, I think The Boys uses the bombasticness to stop its realism being so depressing, as opposed to a lot of realistic superhero things which kill the bombasticness entirely and become, as we've discussed extensively on this show before, again, see the usual whipping boys for this discussion point, tedious, pretentious slogs.
Yeah.
It's weird, almost. The more realistically you get in terms of plot points, the more I'd rather you didn't become a tedious, slow trudge in your actual presentation of them, I think. It might be realistic to portray your realistic superheroes realistically. I'm actually going to make the question more complicated, but I think it's not entertaining. I think, honestly, the more realistic you're getting with your angles, almost I'd rather you got a bit less realistic in terms of how you were doing it, or it's just that level of realism is just going to crush me like a bug.
Yeah. Well, I think you're definitely hitting something which basically it's unrealistic to portray someone realistically in the film. Like, for example, we don't want to see Batman doing his taxes, taking a dump, and and making his lunch for the next day. I mean, like,
are you sure?
There are probably some people who would like to see that, but now that we've all been introduced to Lil Wayne, no, I don't think more of Batman's bodily functions is really necessary. So I can't stop laughing now that I've mentioned Lil Wayne. It had to come out in the discussion of realistic superheroes. But yeah, I mean, it's an obviousism that TV, film, even books and stuff are not realistic because, no one ever eats any food, people rarely sleep, no one ever goes to the toilet unless it's like extremely plot relevant. No one ever makes their lunch or does their laundry, and because that's realistic. That's what a lot of most people's lives are made up of. But it's unrealistic to put that into a film and expect it to be entertaining. There has to be some degree of unreality.
Well, yeah. I guess the most respected thinky superhero thing of all time is probably still Watchmen, and Watchmen is not actually the most grounded and realistic thing of all. It's very literary in a sort of literary fiction sense.
Yeah.
But I think people sometimes get this confused. That's not really the same as being realistic. It's got a giant blue dude with an enormous blue dong.
Yeah.
And a man with a pet saber-toothed squid thing whose plan is to drop a fake alien squid on New York. It's not actually the most grounded and plausible thing in the world.
No, but I think it's kind of taking this idea of that kind of what if superheroes were real, but then kind of expanded it like, well, they've changed the whole world and the whole world has become something that's unrecognizable to us. I guess there's also kind of what if superheroes were real, but superheroes have been real for a long time and thus had shaped the world, is different to what if we found out superheroes were real right now. And also there's an element of like, what if superheroes were real and shaped the whole world, as opposed to what happens if superheroes were real but were basically kept themselves silent and invisible. I mean, I guess that's the kind of appeal of Batman or whatever. It's like, well, we don't know that actually, or maybe Doctor Strange is a better example, where we don't know that the world isn't being beset by demons from another dimension that someone somewhere is dealing with because they just keep it quiet. I mean, you can't prove it's not real. Not really sure where I'm going with this, but yeah, like there's what if superheroes were real in our world, or there's what happens if superheroes were real in their world, and obviously then their world would have different rules and would obviously be quite different to ours. Which is one of the reasons why Watchmen works. It's like, it's not saying what if superheroes were in our world, it was more like if superheroes were in a world, how would that shape that world?
Yeah, although it's still a world which is built heavily around sort of nuclear paranoia and stuff. There is an attempt to comment back on the real world, even though it is also, again, done through sort of high allegory and silliness, which is another reason why Watchmen is good, because it's not actually a trudging, crushing, boring slog in the same way as some realistic things are.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anything, the question got even more complicated, which I think is very much a sign that we really eviscerated it.
We engaged with it, yeah. Well, and ultimately, it's not realistic to be realistic in fiction, but all fiction is a view of reality, and it's about making that view internally consistent and, above all, entertaining.
Well, yeah, there's also obviously the core argument that I don't read fiction to see reality. If I want to see reality, I can go and sit on a park bench. I read fiction to see an actual structure crafted by a craftsman.
Yeah.
I didn't mention that until now because it's actually quite a standard boring argument, but there is also that.
And in the end, isn't that the real truth? The answer is no.
Deep, man, deep.
Bit of Simpsons on the end for you there.
Are we going to have to introduce a new rule on the MFV drinking game where we drink whenever you do a Simpsons quote?
Yeah, at some point. We should try and get more in. That's all we have time for. If you've enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe and your podcatcher of choice so that you never miss an episode. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you'll find other episodes of this podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces from Nick and myself. And if you go to the website right now, you'll see an article counting down my 5 favourite adaptations of Stephen King's horror novels.
And you could also go onto the social medias where we are available at MFV Podcast on Twitter or Moderate Fantasy Violence on the Facebook, where you can see a few of our latest pop cultural hot takes, links to the new episodes when I remember to post them, and links to any new articles we put on the website. And thank you for listening. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me online at nickbryan.com, or you can go to nickmb on Twitter to hear about my latest writings, comics, thoughts, etc.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we will be reviewing another dark anti-superhero story, The Joker. Until then, thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Bye. One of the first PCs. It's set at Cardiff Electric. That sound you might hear is Nick Googling to find out if it's fictional. I think it might be fictional.
I've never heard of Cardiff Electric, but there's a possibility that it is real. Cardiff's real. I can confirm that.